should not be participate in experiments? Do you remember that? What's that?
I was thinking that, no.
Which of the 7 schools of thought?
Psychodynamic?
No. Psychodynamic is definitely one that's skeptical of experimentation. Freud had no use for this, experimentation.
What was the question?
Is it not?
Humanism.
Humanism.
Humanism, you got it. Humanism, thank you. Humanism's the school of thought that is anti-experimentation. They say the moment you treat a person like a subject in an experiment, they will become a little rat. They'll become a little monkey, an experimental subject. People become what you treat them to be. They'll live up to that. Cool. Questions about experimental method? Before we move on to the next method of research, I just want to throw a little more onto you than you may have had an intro. There's always this question. How do we know that the students in this group, say there were 40 students in this group that got the autocratic style, n equals 40, little n is the group size, and there's another 40 students in this class, and there's another 40 in this class. How do we know? So the big N is how many? How many completely studied here?
120.
120 is the big N. That's total participants. But there were little n, n equals 40 in each individual group. How do we know, how can we safely say that the students in this group are the same as the students in this group, have the same characteristics? We know they're different people. How can we even believe that we get legitimate results? Because aren't the people in this group totally different than the people in this group?
Well,
Yeah.
for me,
Hold on, GP. We had a couple of hands here. Go ahead.
I didn't see him.
Joe.
The law of large numbers.
What?
The law of large numbers, when it says you perform an experiment on a large number of...
You guys hear this? The law of large numbers. So check this out. The ideology here is that the more people you have in a group, the more similar they will be. So in other words, if you get in this group, you're going to have 5 lazy kids in this group that aren't going to do any work. But if you randomly select a large number of people, that means you're going to have the same amount of different lazy kids in each group and different, really motivated, hard-working people in each of these groups. So I like to illustrate this by an experience that I had when I was, oh my God, at some point in my life I decided that I was going to learn the art of winemaking, art and science of winemaking. So I took on a job in a vineyard, and I was also trying to get a little bit in touch with my roots because I had learned that when my grandfather and great-grandmother and grandfather came over from Italy, that they were wine growers. They worked as hired farm workers in a vineyard in Italy. And I had gone over and I saw where they were from, and it was a really kind of powerful experience for me, at least. And I learned that they were poor farmers, and they left Italy to look for prosperity, I guess. And I don't know if they found it, but nevertheless, I wanted to kind of get in touch with where my family came from, so I decided to take a job at a vineyard and do what they did. So, bless you, I was working on this vineyard, and from the early spring, you touch each of these vines, it's amazing. You actually have to, your fingers bleed. Does this work? Your shoulders hurt. If anyone's ever done this, it's amazing physical labor. And your fingers bleed because you have to touch each vine and make sure that it's all the shoots where the sprouts are going to come out, that it's supported. Because when those berries, once the grapes start to grow, it gets heavy. And you take these buds, and you may have a shoot that has like 6 groups of grapes coming on it. But you actually take away 4 of those, 3 or 4 of them. You take almost all of them off with the exception of 1 or 2. And the idea here is as those grapes develop, if there's only so many resources, so much water and sunlight and rich minerals coming up into that vine, the more grapes are going to be of a lower quality. So you prune off, it's genetics, it's evolution. You prune off and only leave a couple of bundles of grapes, and then they get all those minerals, and they become very rich, heavy, good winemaking grapes, right? So we go through this whole process, the spring through the summer, and finally it was around, I'd say about August, beginning of August, the wine guy came to me, the guy who ran the vineyard, who happened to be a retired chemistry professor. That's interesting. He came to me, he said, we have to test the grapes to see if they're ready for picking. And I said, okay, I'll go out and I'll taste some of them. He said, no, you can't do that. I said, what do you mean I can't do that? I can tell if they're ripe or not. He said, no, that's one way of doing it. He said, what we're going to do is a scientific method. He said, I want you to go not just on one bush or one vine. I want you to go and take a random sample of 100 grapes of each variety. So we might have Chardonnay grapes and Moscato grapes. Muscimol is something else. That's the chemical agent in sacred mushrooms. Moscato. Do you see Muscimol, Moscato? And Cabernet Franc grapes and whatever, all the different grape varieties. You can't mix them all together. You want to take, he'd say go to and take from an entire row, from the top of the hill down to the bottom. I want you to select a grape or two from each of the vines, and I want you to pick in total 100 grapes. And he said, but there's one more rule. Don't look at the grape you're picking. Go around to the back of the bunch and pick one off from behind. And I'm looking, I said, what is this? I had no idea. I'd never taken a science class. I had no idea what he was teaching me. He was teaching me random sampling. See, I'm going to tell you why he had me take these off. We then went back to the lab once I collected these baggies of grapes, and he did 2 different tests. He tested for sugar content, and he tested for acidity. And there's this little thing called a refractometer, and you crush up the grapes, and you get the juice. And you put a little of that juice on this little lens, and you put it up to the sunlight, and you can see how much sugar's in it by how fast the sugar molecules are jumping around. And the faster the sugar molecules are jumping around, the more heat's generated, the more energy, and this needle goes up. So the more sugar, the higher the needle. Crazy stuff, So I could taste it and taste it sweet, but I could see an exact number, scientifically, empirically, what this is. And the acidic test was seeing how much acid was in it. And there was just the right number. He as a chemist knew there was just this right combination of sugar. And we did this every morning until he said, this morning's the morning. And we went out and started harvesting the grapes. Now, the question is, why did he have me, take not just from one bush, one vine, but a sample from the entire thing? And why did he make me go around the back and pick the grape and not look at the grape I was picking? Who can figure this one out? Go ahead.
So that
I owe you this. I'm staring at you.
So that there wouldn't be any bias. Like,
what kind of bias? What do you mean?
Because like when you see the grapes, sometimes you think like, oh, it's not as good,
We have the natural tendency when we're going to pick a grape to pick the biggest, sweetest, plumpest looking one. That's our human tendency, Boop, and I would have gotten a biased sample that way. By not looking at the grape, I was reaching behind it, taking it off, and it was a random sample. Just like if I do an experiment in here, at this school, I took this 10:30 class, tomorrow's 10:30 class, and Monday's 10:30 class. Everybody had the equal opportunity to sign up for any of those 3 sections, and it should be a pretty fair random sample of who's in that class. Representative sample of college students, right? So representative sample of the grapes. The other thing, why 100 grapes? What did you call it? The
Law of large numbers.
Law of large numbers. If I chose 10 grapes, and one of those grapes was really sour, really off, because this happens. You get a little puny one, and you pick it, and you put it in. That's what you picked. If I have one really sour grape, and I've picked 10 grapes, and you mix that one in, that's 1/10 of the mix. That one sour grape, that one very acidic grape, is going to throw off the whole thing, because there's only 10 grapes to begin with. If there's one little sour grape, and there's 100 grapes, do you see it's going to have less effect on that? People and subjects, according to science, are the same thing. If we're doing an experiment in here, and Jerry has incredible math skills, but no one else does, in a class of 40 people, and 40 is the magic number for an experiment. You have to have at least 40 people in a group. Jerry's math genius is going to get kind of watered down by the other 39 people. But if Jerry's a math genius and we only have 5 people in that study, holy cow, she's going to completely skew the data. Does that make sense to everyone? I mean, it's really fascinating. I'm not a fan of statistics and applying statistics to human beings. I'm not even a fan of experimentation to human beings. But it is neat to see how it works. I'm fascinated by how this whole thing, the ideology behind it is interesting. It's fascinating. But check this out. Here's a real life example. Did I tell you guys about George W. Bush's statement back in, must have been around 2004? He was president. And all kind of media went crazy on this one, and maybe you'll remember it after I say it, because I talk about this a lot. George W. Bush, the second Bush, he was president, and he made a statement, I think it was in New Yorker magazine, that the average income of Americans was, anyone remember this?